Sarah Martinez had always believed that love could conquer anything. Standing on the edge of Devil's Peak, the wind whipping through her long dark hair, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with being part of SEAL Team Alpha. The rocky cliff stretched down into an endless void of jagged stones and churning ocean waters below. At 28, she had proven herself time and again as one of the most skilled operatives in the unit, but tonight felt different. Tonight, something was terribly wrong. The mission briefing had been simple enough. Intelligence suggested that a high-value target was using the isolated coastal caves beneath Devil's Peak as a hideout. The team was to rappel down, secure the area, and extract any valuable information. It was supposed to be routine. Sarah had done hundreds of similar operations, but as she looked around at her teammates, she noticed something that made her stomach twist with unease. Marcus Thompson, the team leader she had served under for 3 years, wouldn't meet her eyes. His usual confident demeanor seemed forced, and his hands trembled slightly as he checked his equipment. James Rodriguez, who had been like a brother to her since training, kept glancing at his watch nervously. Even David Chun, the youngest member of their unit, appeared unusually tense. They had been through hell together in Afghanistan, Syria, and countless classified operations. They were supposed to be family. Something's not right, Sarah whispered to herself, but the howling wind carried her words away into the darkness. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of successful missions and growing suspicion within the unit. Sarah had begun noticing irregularities in their operations. Equipment would go missing, communication protocols were sometimes ignored, and there had been whispered conversations that stopped whenever she approached. Her analytical mind, trained to spot patterns and threats, had been piecing together a puzzle she desperately didn't want to solve. 3 weeks ago, she had discovered encrypted files on Marcus's laptop during a routine equipment check. The files contained information about their recent missions, but with details that didn't match what had actually happened. Dates were altered, casualty reports were modified, and, most disturbing of all, there were financial transactions she couldn't explain. Large sums of money had been transferred to offshore accounts, amounts that far exceeded their military salaries. Sarah had spent sleepless nights trying to rationalize what she had seen. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was part of a classified operation she wasn't privy to. But deep in her heart, she knew the truth was far more sinister. Her teammates, the men she trusted with her life, were involved in something that went against everything they had sworn to protect. The breaking point came when she overheard Marcus on a satellite phone 2 nights ago. He was speaking in hushed tones to someone, discussing loose ends and complications. When he mentioned her name specifically, saying she was getting too close, Sarah's blood ran cold. She realized that her curiosity and investigative instincts had put her in mortal danger. Now, standing on this cliff in the middle of the night, supposedly preparing for a mission that felt increasingly like a setup, Sarah's training kicked in. Every fiber of her being screamed that this was wrong. The location was isolated, the mission parameters were vague, and her teammates were acting like men preparing for something they dreaded. "Sarah, you're up first," Marcus called out, his voice carrying an edge she had never heard before. "We need you to scout the ledge system and report back on possible entry points." She turned to face him, studying his expression in the pale moonlight. His jaw was clenched, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like regret, or maybe guilt. "Marcus, are you sure about this intel? The weather conditions are getting worse, and visibility is almost zero." "Orders are orders," he replied tersely. "You know that better than anyone." James stepped forward, his face a mask of forced casualness. "Come on, Sarah. Since when do you question a mission? You're the best we have at this kind of reconnaissance." There was something in his tone that didn't ring true. These men had known her for years. They knew she always asked questions, always analyzed every detail of a mission. Her caution had saved their lives more times than she could count. So why were they acting like her concerns were unusual? David handed her the rappelling gear, avoiding her gaze completely. His hand shook as he passed her the harness, and she noticed that the equipment felt different somehow. Lighter. As she examined it more closely in the dim light of her tactical flashlight, her heart began to race. The safety clips had been tampered with. The metal showed signs of deliberate weakening, and the ropes had been cut and reattached in a way that would hold initially, but fail under stress. Someone had sabotaged her gear, and there was only one reason why anyone would do such a thing. They were planning to kill her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. These men, whom she had considered her brothers, whom she had trusted with her life countless times, were planning to murder her. The mission was a lie. The isolated location, the night timing, the sabotaged equipment. It was all carefully orchestrated to make her death look like an accident. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process the betrayal. How long had they been planning this? Was it because of what she had discovered about the money? Were they involved in something so serious that they were willing to kill a teammate to protect it? The questions multiplied in her head, but one thing became crystal clear. She was in immediate danger. Actually, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, I think we should abort tonight. The weather is deteriorating rapidly, and I'm getting bad readings on some of this equipment. Marcus's expression hardened. We have our orders, Martinez. The window for this operation closes at dawn. If we don't move now, we lose our chance. What window? Sarah pressed. You haven't told us anything about time sensitivity. In fact, you haven't told us much about this mission at all. The three men exchanged glances, and Sarah saw the moment when they made their decision. Marcus's hand moved slowly toward his sidearm, while James began to position himself to block her retreat. David, still avoiding her eyes, stepped to her other side. Sarah, Marcus said, his voice taking on a tone of false sympathy, you've always been too curious for your own good. Some stones are better left unturned. What are you talking about? She asked, though she already knew. You found the files, James said flatly. We know you've been digging around, asking questions. You've become a liability. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Sarah felt her world collapsing around her. These men, who had once pulled her from burning buildings and carried her to safety when she was wounded, were now calmly discussing her elimination as if she were just another target. Whatever you think you know, David finally spoke, his voice barely audible over the wind. It's bigger than you understand. There are people involved who don't forgive, and they don't forget. So you decided to throw me off a cliff? Sarah's voice carried a mixture of rage and heartbreak. After everything we've been through together? Marcus shrugged, the gesture so casual it was almost more insulting than his words. It's just business, Sarah. Nothing personal. Your death will be ruled an equipment failure during a routine training exercise. Your family will get a nice pension, and everyone moves on. Except me, she said bitterly. Except you. Sarah realized that talking was pointless. These men had already crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had chosen money and self-preservation over loyalty, honor, and friendship. The Sarah Martinez they had known and served with was already dead to them. Now, they just needed to dispose of the physical evidence. But Sarah Martinez hadn't survived years of combat and covert operations by giving up when the odds were against her. As Marcus reached for his weapon and the others closed in, she made a split-second decision that would either save her life or end it more quickly. Instead of backing away from the cliff edge, she stepped toward it. You're right about one thing, she called out over the howling wind. Seals don't die easily. Before any of them could react, Sarah Martinez dove backward off the cliff, choosing her own fate rather than waiting for them to decide it for her. As she fell into the darkness, she heard Marcus shouting above, but his words were lost in the wind and the growing distance between them. The jagged rocks rushed up to meet her, and Sarah closed her eyes, preparing for an impact that would either kill her instantly or give her one last chance to survive. In those final seconds of free fall, she thought about her family, her dreams, and the men who had betrayed everything they once stood for. She thought about revenge. The last thing Sarah heard before hitting the rocks was Marcus's voice echoing down from the cliff. Seals don't die, but sometimes they have to disappear. Then everything went black, and the ocean claimed another victim of betrayal and greed. But the sea, like Sarah Martinez, had its own plans for what came next. The first sensation Sarah experienced was not pain, but the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against rock. Her consciousness returned slowly, like emerging from a deep, dark ocean. When she finally opened her eyes, she found herself staring at a ceiling of jagged stone, illuminated by the flickering light of what appeared to be a small fire. She was alive. The realization sent a shock through her system that was followed immediately by waves of agony. Every inch of her body screamed in protest as she tried to move. Her left arm hung at an unnatural angle, obviously broken. Her ribs felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to them, and there was a sharp, constant pain in her side that suggested internal injuries. Blood had dried on her face from a head wound, and her vision was blurry in one eye. But she was breathing. Her heart was beating. Against all odds, Sarah Martinez had survived a fall that should have killed her instantly. As her vision cleared, she began to take in her surroundings. She was lying on a bed of dried seaweed and moss in what appeared to be a sea cave. The space was surprisingly large, with multiple chambers extending into darkness. The air smelled of salt and something else, something organic and earthy. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the echo of dripping water. "Easy there, soldier. You've been out for 3 days." The voice came from behind her, and Sarah's training kicked in despite her injuries. She tried to turn to assess the potential threat, but her body refused to cooperate. A figure moved into her field of vision, an elderly man with weathered features, wild gray hair, and eyes that held the depth of someone who had seen too much. "Who are you?" Sarah's voice came out as a croak, her throat raw and dry. The man smiled, revealing teeth stained by years of coffee and tobacco. "Name's Thomas Erickson. Used to be Captain Thomas Erickson, Marine Corps, but that was a lifetime ago. Now I'm just a crazy old hermit who lives in these caves." Sarah studied him carefully, her mind working through the implications. "How did I get here? How long have you been watching me?" Thomas chuckled, settling down on a makeshift stool carved from driftwood. "I saw you fall. Hell of a thing to witness. I've been living in these caves for 8 years now, and I've seen a lot of stupid tourists get too close to the edge, but I've never seen anyone survive a fall like that." "Survive?" Sarah touched her side gingerly, feeling the rough texture of bandages made from torn cloth. "Barely. You landed in the only spot along this entire coastline where there's a chance of living through a fall like that. There's a series of ledges about halfway down the cliff face, hidden from view above. You hit 3 of them on your way down, which slowed your fall just enough. Then you went into the water instead of hitting the rocks directly." Thomas pointed toward the cave entrance, where Sarah could see daylight reflecting off water. "The current carried you into this cave system. I've got a small boat hidden in here, and I was checking my nets when I found you floating face down. Took me the better part of 6 hours to get you stabilized." Sarah felt a wave of gratitude mixed with suspicion. In her line of work, coincidences were rare and usually dangerous. "Why would you help me? You don't know who I am or what I might have done." The old Marine's expression grew serious. "I know enough. I know you're military. The scars, the muscle definition, the way you assess me as a threat, even while barely conscious. I know you didn't fall by accident. Not with those injuries and not for where you fell. And I know that someone wanted you dead." "How could you possibly know that?" Thomas reached into a battered backpack and pulled out a small device that Sarah recognized immediately. It was her emergency beacon, the one that should have automatically activated when she fell. This was in her gear, but it had been disabled. Someone made sure that even if you survived the fall, nobody would come looking for you. The confirmation of her teammates' betrayal hit Sarah harder than her physical injuries. She had hoped, even while falling, that maybe she had been wrong. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But seeing her sabotaged beacon removed any doubt about their intentions. "They really meant for me to die," she whispered. "Who's that?" Thomas asked gently. Sarah looked at this stranger who had saved her life and made a decision that would change everything. Over the next hour, fighting through pain and exhaustion, she told him everything. She explained about the SEAL team, the suspicious financial transactions, the tampered equipment, and the cold calculation with which her teammates had planned her murder. Thomas listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he sat in silence for several long minutes, staring out at the water. "I've heard stories," he finally said. "Rumors about special operations units getting involved with private military contractors, drug cartels, arms dealers. The kind of money involved can corrupt even the best soldiers. Marcus mentioned that there are people involved who don't forgive and don't forget," Sarah said. "What if this goes higher up the chain? What if the corruption extends beyond just my team?" Thomas nodded grimly. "Then, you're in more danger than you realize. If they think you're dead, that gives you an advantage. But if they ever find out you survived, they'll come to finish the job." Without hesitation, Sarah tried to sit up, gritting her teeth against the pain. "I can't stay here. I need to find proof of what they're doing and expose them." "You need to heal first," Thomas said firmly. "You're in no condition to go anywhere. Besides, as far as the world knows, Sarah Martinez died 3 days ago. That gives us time to plan. Us." The old Marine's eyes hardened. "I spent 30 years serving this country, and I've seen what happens when good soldiers get corrupted by greed. If your teammates are involved in something that threatens national security, then it's my duty to help stop them." Over the following days, as Sarah's strength slowly returned, Thomas shared his own story. He had been forced into early retirement after questioning orders that he suspected were illegal. Rather than fight the system and risk destroying his family's reputation, he had chosen exile. The caves had become his sanctuary, but also his prison. "I've been hiding from my own cowardice for 8 years, he admitted one evening as they shared a simple meal of fish and wild vegetables. "Maybe this is my chance to make things right." Sarah learned that Thomas was far from helpless in his isolation. He had maintained contact with a network of former military personnel who shared his concerns about corruption in the ranks. Through a secure communication system he had built in the caves, he could reach people who might be willing to help. "There's a journalist named Rebecca Chun," he explained. "She's been investigating military contractor scandals for years. And I know a few retired officers who still have connections in Washington. If we can get solid proof of what your team is doing, we might be able to bring them down. But getting proof would require Sarah to return to the world of the living. And that meant putting herself directly in the path of people who had already tried to kill her once." As her body healed, her mind focused on a single goal. She would make her former teammates pay for their betrayal. The question wasn't whether she would seek revenge. The question was whether she would live long enough to achieve it. As she looked out at the endless ocean from her hidden cave, Sarah began to formulate a plan. Marcus had said that SEALs don't die, but sometimes they have to disappear. He was about to learn that some disappearances are only temporary, and that the dead sometimes come back to settle old scores. The ghost of Sarah Martinez was about to return from the depths, and she was bringing hell with her. 6 weeks had passed since Sarah Martinez had supposedly died at Devil's Peak. 6 weeks of healing, planning, and preparing for what would either be justice or suicide. Her broken bones had mended, though she would always carry scars from her fall. More importantly, the fire of vengeance that burned in her heart had crystallized into something cold and calculating. Thomas had been true to his word. Through his network of contacts, they had learned that her former teammates had been busy since her death. The team had been reassigned to a classified operation involving weapons trafficking in Eastern Europe. More disturbing was the revelation that Sarah's death had barely caused a ripple in their organization. Her memorial service had been a brief, closed affair, and within a week, it was as if she had never existed. "They erased you," Thomas said bitterly as he reviewed the intelligence they had gathered. "Officially, you died during a training accident. Your family was told it was classified, so they couldn't even get details about what happened. Sarah stared at the surveillance photos Thomas had obtained through his contacts. Marcus, James, and David were living their lives as if nothing had happened. They continued their missions, collected their paychecks, and presumably their blood money from whatever corrupt scheme they were running. The casual indifference to her supposed death was almost more insulting than the original betrayal. "What about the journalist?" Sarah asked. "Rebecca Chun. Have you made contact?" Thomas nodded, pulling out a secure satellite phone. "She's interested, but she needs more than our word. She wants documentation, recorded conversations, financial records. The kind of evidence that will stand up in court and public scrutiny. Then, that's what we'll give her." Sarah had spent weeks developing a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. If she was officially dead, she could move without the restrictions that had bound her as a serving military officer. She could break laws, cross lines, and use methods that would have been impossible in her former life. Most importantly, she could get close to her targets without them suspecting anything, because dead people don't seek revenge. The first phase involved establishing a new identity. Thomas had contacts who specialized in creating false documentation for people who needed to disappear from dangerous situations. Within 2 weeks, Sarah had become Elena Rodriguez, a freelance military consultant with an impressive but completely fabricated background. "The beauty of this identity," Thomas explained as he handed her a passport and driver's license, "is that it will hold up to casual scrutiny, but it's obviously fake to anyone who digs deep. When your former teammates eventually figure out who you really are, it will scare them even more." Sarah studied her new face in the mirror. She had dyed her hair blonde and cut it short. Colored contacts changed her dark brown eyes to green. Subtle makeup techniques altered the apparent shape of her face. She looked like Sarah Martinez's sister, similar enough to be recognized by someone who knew her well, but different enough to pass unnoticed in casual encounters. The second phase involved infiltrating the network that had corrupted her former teammates. Through Thomas's contacts, Sarah learned that the operation was being run by a private military contractor called Meridian Defense. The company had legitimate contracts with the U.S. government, but intelligence suggested they were also involved in arms trafficking, drug money laundering, and assassination services for the highest bidder. Meridian recruits former Special Forces personnel, Rebecca Chun explained during a secure video call from her office in Washington. "They pay extremely well, and they don't ask too many questions about methods. If your former teammates are working for them, it explains how they got involved in criminal activity." Sarah had spent days studying Meridian's operations and personnel. The company was headquartered in a glass tower in downtown Los Angeles, but their real operations were run from a secure facility outside the city. Getting inside would require skills she had learned in her SEAL training, but it would also require a level of deception that went against everything she had been taught about honor and duty. "I'm going to apply for a job," she announced to Thomas one evening as they reviewed the facility's security protocols. "You're going to what?" Elena Rodriguez has exactly the kind of background Meridian looks for. Former military, special operations experience, no current government ties. "I'm going to walk in the front door and offer my services." Thomas stared at her as if she had lost her mind. "Sarah, these people try to kill you. If they recognize you, they won't," she said with confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I've studied the psychological profiles of betrayal victims. The last thing they'll expect is for me to show up asking for a job. Their guilt will make them see what they expect to see, not what's actually there." The plan was dangerous to the point of insanity, but it was also the only way to get the evidence they needed. Sarah would infiltrate Meridian, document their criminal activities, and gather proof of her former teammates' involvement. Once she had enough evidence to destroy them, she would disappear again and let Rebecca Chun do her job. But first, she needed to test her new identity and her ability to deceive people who had once known her intimately. The opportunity came when she learned that James Rodriguez was taking leave to visit his sister's wedding in San Diego. Sarah had met his sister Elena several times during family gatherings that the team occasionally attended. If she could fool Elena Rodriguez in a casual encounter, she could fool anyone. Sarah spent 3 days in San Diego, learning the wedding venue's layout and timing. On the day of the ceremony, she positioned herself at a coffee shop across the street from the church, watching as guests arrived. When she saw James walk up the steps in his dress uniform, her heart hammered so hard she thought it might give her away. But James Rodriguez looked right through Elena Rodriguez without the slightest sign of recognition. The real test came at the reception, where Sarah had managed to get herself invited by befriending one of the bride's cousins. She spent 2 hours in the same room as the man who had helped plan her murder, even engaging in small talk with relatives he introduced her to. Not once did James show any sign that he recognized her. It's amazing how much family resemblance there is in some Hispanic families, James commented to his sister, glancing at Sarah across the room. That Elena woman could almost be Sarah's sister. Elena Rodriguez just nodded politely and excused herself to the ladies' room, where she locked the door and fought back tears of rage and grief. James had literally compared her to herself and hadn't realized it. The man who had once saved her life in Afghanistan couldn't recognize her when she was standing 3 feet away. The psychological impact of the encounter gave Sarah exactly the confidence boost she needed. If James couldn't see through her disguise even when he was looking directly at her, then Marcus and David wouldn't either. More importantly, the casual way James had mentioned her name proved that her death meant so little to him that he could discuss her in past tense without any emotional reaction. That night, Sarah called Thomas from her hotel room in San Diego. It worked. I'm invisible to them. They've compartmentalized my death so completely that they literally can't see me when I'm right in front of them. Then, you're ready for Phase 3? I'm ready. Phase 3 would take her directly into the lion's den. Elena Rodriguez would apply for a position at Meridian Defense, using credentials that would eventually lead Marcus, James, and David directly to her. But by the time they realized who she really was, Sarah would have everything she needed to destroy them. The ghost of Sarah Martinez was about to walk into Meridian Defense's offices and apply for a job working alongside the man who had murdered her. And when they finally recognized the face staring back at them, she wanted them to understand that their nightmare was just beginning. The dead, as it turned out, made excellent undercover operatives. The moment of truth came on a Tuesday morning in the sleek conference room of Meridian Defense's Los Angeles headquarters. Sarah, now fully embodying her Elena Rodriguez persona, sat across from the 3 men who had tried to murder her, maintaining perfect composure as they reviewed her fabricated credentials. Marcus Thompson looked older than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a nervous habit of checking his phone every few minutes. James Rodriguez had gained weight, and there was a softness to him that suggested guilt was taking its toll. David Chun appeared to be holding up better physically, but she noticed his hands shook slightly when he thought no one was looking. Your experience in Central America is particularly impressive, Ms. Rodriguez, Marcus said, not looking up from her file. Meridian has several operations in that region that could benefit from your expertise. I appreciate the opportunity, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady and professional. I've heard excellent things about Meridian's work in challenging environments. What Marcus couldn't see was the hidden camera built into Elena Rodriguez's watch, or the recording device disguised as a pen in her jacket pocket. Every word of this conversation was being transmitted to Thomas in real time and copied to secure servers that Rebecca Chun could access remotely. The interview proceeded smoothly for 45 minutes. Sarah answered questions about fictitious operations, demonstrated knowledge of weapons systems and tactical procedures, and gradually steered the conversation toward Meridian's less legitimate activities. Her former teammates seemed impressed by Elena Rodriguez's apparent lack of scruples and her willingness to work in moral gray areas. It was David who finally triggered the moment Sarah had been waiting for. There is one thing we should mention, he said, glancing nervously at Marcus. Some of our operations require absolute loyalty and discretion. We've had problems in the past with team members who asked too many questions. What kind of problems? Sarah asked innocently. Marcus's jaw tightened. The kind that got resolved permanently. The implied threat hung in the air, and Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction as she realized they had just confessed to murder on camera. But she wasn't done yet. She needed them to be specific, to mention her by name, to give Rebecca Chun everything she needed to destroy them. I understand the importance of operational security, Sarah said carefully. In my experience, curiosity can be a liability in this line of work. Exactly, James agreed. We had a teammate once who couldn't leave well enough alone, always digging into things that weren't her concern. Eventually, she became more trouble than she was worth. What happened to her? The three men exchanged glances, and Sarah saw the moment when they decided to trust Elena Rodriguez with their darkest secret. Training accident, Marcus said with a slight smile. Sarah Martinez was an excellent soldier, but she lacked discretion. Sometimes the best operatives have to be retired early. There was a recorded confession to her murder, with her name specifically mentioned. Sarah felt a cold satisfaction wash over her, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm sure her family was devastated by the loss, she said. Military families understand the risks, David replied callously. Besides, she didn't have much family to speak of. The casual dismissal of her life and the pain of her loved ones was the final straw. Sarah had gotten everything she needed for Rebecca Chen's story, but now she wanted these men to understand exactly who they were talking to. Actually, she said, slowly reaching up to remove her colored contacts, Sarah Martinez had more family than you realized. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. As the green contact lenses came out, revealing her natural brown eyes, and as she brushed her blonde hair back from her face in a gesture that was purely Sarah Martinez, all three men froze. Marcus was the first to recognize her. The color drained from his face as if he had seen a ghost, which, in a sense, he had. That's impossible, he whispered. Seals don't die, remember? Sarah said, using the exact words he had spoken on the cliff. Sometimes we just disappear for a while. James was reaching for his weapon, but Sarah was faster. Years of training and 6 weeks of burning rage made her reactions lightning quick. She had a pistol in her hand before any of them could move, and her aim was steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I wouldn't, she said calmly. I'm recording this conversation, and killing me now would just make things worse for you. You're supposed to be dead, David stammered. We saw you fall. No one could have survived that. Apparently, you overestimated the effectiveness of sabotaged equipment and underestimated the effectiveness of luck, Sarah replied. But I didn't come here to kill you. I came here to give you a choice. She reached in her jacket with her free hand and pulled out 3 identical envelopes, placing them on the conference table. Inside each envelope is evidence of every crime you've committed in the past 2 years. Financial records, communication intercepts, surveillance photos, and recorded confessions. Everything Rebecca Chun needs to destroy you professionally, and everything the FBI needs to put you in federal prison for the rest of your lives. Marcus stared at the envelopes as if they were venomous snakes. What do you want? Justice, Sarah said simply. You have 24 hours to turn yourselves in to the FBI and confess to your crimes, including the attempted murder of Sarah Martinez. You will cooperate fully with the investigation and provide evidence against everyone else involved in this conspiracy. And if we refuse, Sarah smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Then, tomorrow morning, Rebecca Chun publishes her story about corruption in special operations units. By noon, your photos will be on every news website in the country. By evening, you'll be the most wanted men in America. And, unlike the official investigation, I won't be bound by legal niceties when I come for you again. The room fell silent, except for the sound of air conditioning and David's labored breathing. Sarah could see the wheels turning in their heads as they calculated their options and realized they had none. You're bluffing, James said finally. You won't risk exposure just for revenge. Sarah's expression hardened. Try me. I've already died once because of you. I have nothing left to lose and all the time in the world to make you pay. She backed toward the door, keeping her weapon trained on them. 24 hours, gentlemen. Choose wisely. As she reached the door, Marcus called out desperately. Sarah, wait. We can work something out. There's enough money for everyone. You could disappear permanently, start over somewhere else. Sarah paused with her hand on the doorknob. You still don't understand, do you? This was never about money. This was about honor, loyalty, and the oath we all swore to protect this country. You broke that oath. You betrayed everything we stood for. And you tried to kill me to cover it up. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. See you in hell, Marcus. 23 hours later, Marcus Thompson, James Rodriguez, and David Chun walked in the FBI field office in Los Angeles and surrendered themselves to federal agents. Their confessions led to the dismantling of Meridian Defense's criminal operations and the arrest of 24 other conspirators. Rebecca Chen's story broke the following week, sparking a congressional investigation into corruption in military contracting. The scandal reached all the way to the Pentagon and resulted in new oversight procedures for special operations units. Sarah Martinez was officially declared alive and cleared of any wrongdoing. She was offered reinstatement to active duty and a promotion, but she declined both. Instead, she disappeared once again, this time by choice rather than necessity. Thomas Erickson emerged from his self-imposed exile to testify before Congress about the need for better protections for military whistleblowers. He was awarded the Medal of Freedom and spent his remaining years working to prevent the kind of corruption that had nearly cost Sarah her life. As for Sarah herself, she was spotted occasionally in various parts of the world, sometimes working as a private security consultant, sometimes appearing as an advocate for veterans' rights, and sometimes simply vanishing into the crowd when people got too curious about her identity. But those who knew her story understood that Sarah Martinez had found something more valuable than revenge. She had reclaimed her honor, protected her country from those who would exploit it, and proven that sometimes the dead do return to balance the scales of justice. The men who had said SEALs don't die learned the hard way that they were right. Sarah Martinez hadn't died when they threw her off that cliff. She had simply been reborn as something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined, a ghost with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. In the end, the only thing that died at Devil's Peak was their illusion that betrayal comes without consequences.